Hello and welcome to Forever Sports, and not a great weekend of URC rugby for the South African franchises. Just one win out of four, and all of a sudden the Lions in particular, for example, chance of playoffs not looking particularly good. And I think quite a few key takeaways over the weekend with regards to performance, with regards to why teams are losing, as well as some worrying trends. But also, I think a little bit of perspective with regards to some of the performances and some of the results. Now, the results, I think, aren't maybe need sort of for panic, but I think it's more sort of the performances and the context in which the losses happened, for example, and where they were lost, and why this continues to be a bit of a consistent trend across some of the teams. We'll also have a look at the log and look at exactly what sort of the state of the URC is. We go into a break from the URC. We're going into the EPCR this weekend, playoff matches. So big weekend for South African teams, and hopefully we can get at least two teams into sort of those quarterfinals and the likes of that. Before we get into sort of our 5 takeaways, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Right, let's go, shall we? So the big thing I want to sort of highlight is the fact that SA sides are struggling with some of their discipline, and it is costing them. Now, when I say struggling with discipline, this is kind of what I mean. I'm not talking about penalties conceded, for example, and line offenses like that. In fact, Lions are actually the third best disciplined side in the league, and yet, you kind of look where they are. But I'll sort of go into it a little bit. Now, this is what I mean. Stormers were comfortable. They were 17-0 up against Scarlets on Friday. And then things took a turn, and a couple of silly mistakes. And I look at that yellow card from Sash Farmingham's video, and I'm talk about him more in a bit. That changed the game. It really did change the game. It took away the momentum that the Stormers had. It gave all the momentum to Ulster. And, he went off at 17, I think it was 17-7 down, or 17-12 down, I think it was. And then he came back, or 17-13, whatever it was. And by the time he came back, it was 22.17 down. So, it's amazing how sort of you lose a player, you lose you can see 2 tries. And just as he was coming back, just before he came back, Neatly Bashir went and got a red card. Now, it's a bit of a harsh. Well, I don't know. It's a typical one. Lots of people saying it's quite harsh on Neatly Bashir. I think the biggest problem is that he doesn't rap, and it's not really about the height. It's about the fact he doesn't rap. And in that regard, in terms of the nature of the law, he did deserve it. But this is what I'm sort of talking about. So in terms of discipline, Lions third best, actually. Stormers 7th, Sharks 9th, Bulls 11th. But we've got a massive cards issue across our teams. Now, the Lions are currently 10th worst with 9 yellow cards, 1 red card. Stormers have got 5 yellow cards. They're actually the 4th best in terms of that, but they got a red card. But they look at the Sharks and at the Bulls. And what's really interesting is the fact that these are the highest ranked South African sides. But, the Sharks have had 13 yellow cards this season, whilst the Bulls have had 12 yellow cards and 4 red cards. So that's something we really need to sort of snuff up, because cards, as you can see over here, change games, and the Lions had a card this weekend, which didn't help things when they're being hammered by Glasgow Warriors. And it's a bit of a worrying trend if we're going to continue sort of picking up these sort of cards, because sometimes you can cope without them, but you start to get a reputation. And that reputation, even if it is really, really sort of unconscious in the referee's mind, it is there. It's going to start to sit there saying, "Oh, well, this team is the most red carded team. They've got bad discipline," and that sort of plays on a referee's mind. It maybe shouldn't, and maybe they're trying not to, but I said there isn't going to be an unconscious point of view. In terms of number 2, home advantage continues to be absolutely everything in the URC. Look at these results: just 2 away wins across the competition, and especially I think South African teams going over to you. And to be honest, the one win that was away from home was a pretty shocking win from Leinster, from the Sharks' point of view, because they should never be losing that game. So, Ulster winning at home, Edinburgh pumping Dragons at home, you can't expect that. The Bulls pumping Zebra at home, you also expect that. Munster beating Connacht, close game though, and it's amazing how home advantage does seem to be quite a big leveler. But Scarlets beating the Ospreys 28 points to 22, 38 points to 22. The Sharks going down to Leinster, that was a bit of an anomaly. But even Benetton beating Cardiff, and then Glasgow Warriors pumping the Lions. Ironically, or weird enough rather, 42 of those points were in the first half, playing with an incredible tailwind. And after that, the damage was really done. But that's the main thing. You take away 2 results, and the rest of them are all home wins. So this is why it was quite interesting. You looked at like the probability of teams making the playoffs, and Lions was sitting at 49% going into the weekend. Now, that'll shift down given the other results. But it shows you, because they've got 4 home games in a row towards the end of the stretch, same with the Stormers, that their chance of getting to the playoffs are a lot higher than other teams who have to go on the road, because home advantage proves to be so important. This is an interesting one, and I'm very interested to sort of see what people have to say about this. And we're talking a little about Sash Zulu, because on Friday I saw everything that justifies just why he's so highly rated, as well as maybe a few reasons just to be cautious about it. Now, let's have a look at his game, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. So, first of all, he 69 minutes played because he was on a yellow card for 10 minutes. He had an 80% kick success rate. He generally kicked very well for Paul, apart from when the ball fell off the tee and he had to rush it. But 50% tackle success rate, for example, but still scoring 14 points. So it was a game of sort of hit and miss, really, for Sash Zulu. He had some really bright moments. In fact, John Cooney, who he had a bit of a tiff with during the game, posted on Instagram, he said he hasn't seen too many better performances at Raven Park. And I know what he means. You know, you watch what Sasha does, and, you know, at 22, for example, absolutely world class. A couple of moments where he was sort of cutting gaps and kicking really well. You can see that he's got everything he needs to be a world class player. But there's a maturity which he's previously shown, which is maybe also a little bit lacking. I think we forget how young he is at 23 years old and the responsibility on his shoulders. And there's still improvement that needs to come from him. You know, he's got all the tools. We know he's got all the tools. And this is why it's so important and so frustrating. He's been injured so much this season, because the more you play, the better, you know, you'll get, and the more you'll sort of cut those part out. So, I mean, you look at that at 2 try assists, for example, 14 points, 3 defenders beaten. You know, that looks really, really positive. But also a silly yellow card, and they could see 2 tries whilst he was off, a bad pass, and not his best defensive effort at all. So he continues to be a player where we all know he's going to be one of the top players in the world, if he can just sort of understand and play a bit more to be able to understand when to toe the line, when not, and maybe sort of cut up the soft moments. And that comes with the maturity of playing. And that's the big thing. You know, we've got to get him playing as much as possible so that he can understand what his roles are and sort of cut the bad things out. Number 4, could Jacques Nienaber be the Leinster difference? And what I mean by this is the fact that Leinster have not won anything in the last few years. They currently sit top of the log, 62 points, even with that loss over the weekend. And the big thing from them is their defense. It has been absolutely terrific this season. And I think what's really positive is the fact that it's about defensive systems. It's about the fact that they brought in a younger side that's gone to Loftus, for example, that's gone to Durban and not conceded a lot of points. So, you know, you look at that and you're thinking, right, cool, 62 points thing, but how does that break down? This is where you can see the Jacques Nienaber effect. You know, tries for 56. You know, that, I mean, Glasgow Warriors have scored more tries, for example. The Bulls have scored 3 fewer tries. Munster scored 3 fewer tries. You know, there's lots of teams who have scored quite a few tries, but look at the tries against, for example. They've conceded just 27 tries throughout the entire season. The next best is 32. That's 5 tries fewer with Glasgow Warriors. And after that, there's some big numbers. And if you go, for example, points against, they're the only side that's conceded fewer than 200 points. The next best in terms of points against is literally Glasgow Warriors with 249. That's like 60 points less. So they're conceding far fewer points per game, even if their points for example, are not the highest. Glasgow Warriors have actually scored more points, as have the Bulls, you know, and there are lots of other teams out there who are quite close to what Leinster have scored in terms of the amount of points, but it's their defense that is really starting to change them. And, you know, you always talk about the fact that attack wins you games, you know, defense wins you titles. Whether they'll be able to go all the way, finally, we'll have to wait and see, but we're definitely seeing a marked difference from Leinster. Where maybe they're not maybe the attacking powerhouse they were because they had to sacrifice on a few things, but they're certainly getting it right with regards to their defense. And then finally, the Sharks. We've got to kind of talk about it. You know, we also talk about the Lions a little bit during this weekend, but I want to do a proper breakdown of them. But the Sharks have a fundamental problem with consistency. This is a Sharks side which can beat any side in this competition on their day, but I still firmly believe, and they almost proved that last week, could also lose to any sort of side. You know, and this result is not a result that you can really accept because you've got a Springbok-laden side. I think 12 or 13 of the Sharks 23, you know, were sort of Springboks. And even your non-Springboks, your likes of Vincent Tuka, could very easily be a Springbok. You know, Sia Masuku is not capped, but, you know, is on the radar. You've got Lorenzo Julius. It's a matter of time before he becomes a Springbok. So this is Ethan Hooker, you know, been part of the Box squads. So even, you know, you look at that and you're thinking, how are they losing to a Leinster junior side, really? And I don't have the answer. You know, it's a question you can poise, but I don't think anybody really knows why it's such an issue. And I mean, you look at these results, and this is results since about the 11th of January. So the last sort of few months. Got beaten by Toulouse. It was actually not a bad performance. Then they went over to Bordeaux with a B side and they got hammered. They then a week later hammered Cardiff. You put 42 points in Cardiff. They then beat the Bulls. Bulls who are been at that time I think second in the URC. Then lost to the Lions. A few weeks later, and then beat the Lions, but just beat the Lions, and then beat Zebra by 1 point, and then lost to Leinster's B side. So for all they've got the players, they're just not getting it right. And I don't know if it's a case of they need to rotate a bit more in terms of how they use their Springboks and maybe sort of look at combinations maybe and not just sort of chop and change this player, that player, that player, and try and work on more combinations and more consistency in those combinations. But the reality is they're not stringing together consistent performances, and it's going to hurt them in the long run because they never seem to have that momentum. They're still sitting fourth on the URC log. They're still looking very good for the playoffs. But this is a side that you're competing for the title, and you just feel with the way things are going that once it gets to a playoff game, anything could potentially happen, and they could have an early exit and might be beaten by a Cardiff in the quarterfinals of the URC, which shouldn't be happening. So, if you have any ideas of where it's going wrong for Sharks, let me know down in the comments below. But that's my sort of URC 5 takeaways. What are yours? Let me know. Smash a like on the video, subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.